Thank you. Thank you very much, President of Aliran, Mr. Haridas, and the committee members of Aliran, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to be here this morning. It's a very gloomy morning here. It is. It's almost as gloomy as it is for the country now. You know, we had these elections recently, and the strange thing about this election is that after the election, it looks like nothing has changed. Yes. You know, this is a feeling that people have. But I think that things have changed considerably since the election. And the election is quite, it's ironical, but actually this election is actually the completion of GE15. GE15 has taken longer than usual because we had elections on two different sets of dates on November the 22nd last year. And then we had this on August the 12th. And there was much anxiety about what would happen in this election. This anxiety primarily stemmed from the fact that there was this expectation that in the event that Pakatan Harapan didn't do as well as it should, then there was the danger of defections by some members of Pakatan Harapan, some MPs, and this would cause some instability in the country. So in that sense, that main hurdle of establishing political stability has been cleared. So there should be no discussion now on any kind of defection taking place, any kind of instability being introduced as a result of Pakatan Harapan losing its parliamentary majority, or of the unity government collapsing as a result of this development. So we have a situation where it would seem the people in general have endorsed the government in power, and it is the business of the government in power to get on with the business of attending to certain issues. And there are, I think, 6 different issues that the government should address. And these 6 different issues relate to what I would call it was almost a design, it was a designed decline that Malaysia has had in the last 25 years. It's almost a designed decline we have had. We have had increasing debt. Debt has gone up very much in the last 12 years. Then we have a problem of a devalued currency, which is also a serious concern because whatever we buy, we import a lot of our food. Whatever we buy costs a lot more. And then the fourth thing is that we have had, I think, more or less ingrained discrimination against certain regions, against certain groups in this country. And one of the groups that feels very, very distant and detached from what is going on in Malaysia, and this is a very important region, is the Sabah and Sarawak component of Malaysia. I think for the first time now, they are really talking about the fact that there's a big development gap between the peninsula and Sabah and Sarawak. Although Sabah and Sarawak are the source of probably our greatest wealth in this country, they have been left behind. And lastly, I think all of us, all Malaysians are concerned, especially with the unity government in power, that we attain national unity. So we want to overcome the division that exists, the divisions that exist in the country. So in that sense, we have come to a stage where there will be some kind of an entrenchment of a government. There is no fear of a failing or a falling government. So it's really a situation where it's at the feet of Anwar Ibrahim, the Prime Minister, to bring about some kind of inject some new life into this flagging system. The problem with Malaysia is that we have always relied on folk heroes. Our country is one that is full of folk heroes. And I'm thinking of, I think one of the greatest folk heroes, or not of first three prime ministers. No, they were not folk heroes. They were ordinary gentlemen with big hearts. But I think from the time of Mahathir, we have had what we call a folk hero. And the folk hero, you do not know what he's going to do, because it's like the folk are with him in whatever he does. And he promised us many things. Dr. Mahathir promised us a car. He promised us a car that will sell well all over the world. He promised us we will achieve Vision 2020. And then he started his Prawaja Steel, where he said we were going to become a huge producer of steel. And it was a failure. It was a failure from the beginning. And there were many such projects that he started. So I consider him the biggest fallen and failed folk hero in the country. Right? Yeah. Then we have had other folk heroes, and I would say that one of the other folk heroes was Harun Idris, who was the Menteri Besar of Selangor. I think he was a very good man, but he got involved in some difficulties, and it ended his political career effectively, and he couldn't make a comeback. This was another folk hero we had. Earlier, when I was thinking back, there was one other folk hero that Malaysia had, but he perhaps has been forgotten very much in this country. This was Abdul Aziz Ishak, who was the Minister of Agriculture and Cooperatives, who believed that the Tunku's government was not serving the interests of the farmers, and he wanted to start cooperatives throughout the country. He wanted middlemen to be eliminated so that the farmers would get a fair price for their produce. Yeah. Now, this again he didn't succeed in it, because at that time, there was nothing in place to collect the produce from the farmers and market it at a competitive rate. So Tunku acted against that folk hero, Abdul Aziz Ishak. They were telling him to leave. He didn't. Later, he resigned. And as a result, the Tunku bought himself more time. I think that was the first real crisis that the Tunku faced. The second crisis that the Tunku faced was in 1959, just before the elections. Dr. Lim Chong Yu, as president of MCA, asked for 40% of the seats in parliament. Now, UMNO was not going to concede to this at that time. So the other leaders in MIC and MCA agreed with the Tunku and with Tun Razak that maybe we should not be asking for 40%. This is no go. And so Dr. Lim Chong Yu resigned as president of MCA, and they went into an election, and they did very well in the 1959 elections. I mean, there is no doubt about that. Then, of course, we had the formation of Malaysia, which was very successful. But of all the prime ministers we had, I think that Tunku was the greatest person we had, because this is not from me. Actually, one day I was sitting with Dr. Mahathir and Dr. Siti Hasma, and she asked me, she said, "Santa, do you know who is the greatest Malaysian?" And I said, "Tukul Rahman." She said, "I agree with you," she said. So it's a very interesting that the Tunku overcame that 1959 crisis. And of course, then we came to the formation of Malaysia in 1963. Of course, there are many claimants as to who conceived the idea of Malaysia. Some say it was Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. But if you read Ghazali Shafi's book, he will tell you before he was born, he had already thought of it. That was Ghazali Shafi. So, you have this situation where we had a very successful prime minister, and the 1960s were probably the best years in terms of economic growth. Felda was a great success. There was a very good team of leaders, Tun Dr. Ismail, Tun Razak, Tun Samandan, and Tun Tan Siew Sin. And they were getting on very well, I think, in the 1960s was probably the heyday about. And the time from 1957 to 1962 was particularly important, because based on the success of Federation of Malaya as an independent entity, the British were willing to concede to us the formation of Malaysia. They were trying to get rid of this, but they also wanted a continuing arrangement. So they sort of held the formation of Malaysia. And the formation of Malaysia was welcomed by the West in general, especially the United States of America, which regarded this as a major economic grouping in the world, because tiny, puny Peninsula Malaya became part of a larger entity called Malaysia. And they saw this as an area of stability and growth for the future. And they trusted the Tunku completely. Of course, then we had that episode with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew leaving or being asked to leave Malaysia, and we were Malaysia without Singapore. The next incident that took place was the May 13th incident. Now, the May 13th incident was a was a big setback for Malaysia, because Malaysia was doing reasonably well, but there were people in this country who felt that we were not on the right track. And I think one of the reasons why we were not on the right track was that in 1956, when we signed the Independence of Malaya Agreement with the British, the government agreed to keep the wages of our rubber tappers and tin mine workers really low, because the British were interested in assuring for themselves profits that had accrued to them before 1957 in the colonial period. So this is a mistake they made. So as a result, the wages were low, and the people who were hired to work in the government, in various, especially at that time, we had a large agricultural sector, they were not getting the rewards that was due to them. So there was this huge divide between what was perceived to be urban prosperity and rural, poverty. And we had this May 13th incidents, which was used by Tun Razak, I think, largely, to consolidate his power, and then to, of course, ease the Tunku. The Tunku was no longer on the scene. So when we fast forward, after 69, I think the most important date in 1969, after 69, was March the 3rd, when Parliament reconvened, March the 3rd, 1971, when Parliament reconvened, and Tun Razak presented this new sets of legislation relating to us not being allowed to question a number of core issues. Yes. One is relating to the special position of the Malays and the Bumiputras. The other one was relating to the position of the Sultans, the position of the national language, and of course, the citizenship of the non-Malays in Malaysia. So with that, I think we stopped that heavy debating on these subjects, and we settled for a more sedate kind of parliament where there was much acrimony behind the scenes, but it was never voiced in parliament. So all these things went underground. So if you ask me, the founders of Malaya and Malaysia, the first founders of Malaya and Malaysia, were men who were generally upright, men of probity, promise, and they were very, very particular that we followed the law, upholding the law. These first pioneers of Malaysia, under no circumstances can be accused by any of us of robbing the nation. They didn't do that. They didn't enrich themselves. And they did not indulge in blatant use of power, or did not take bold and brazen measures to sort of strike us down on any issue. Of course, there was the ISA, we had the communist problem, all that. But they did things where generally there was a high level of contentment. But you see, what happened was that in the meantime, government was spending a lot of money on basic items like provision of water supply, building of roads access, basically providing access. And also these Felda schemes, which started in 1956. We had almost 2 million hectares of land which had been allotted to Felda schemes, and the good thing again about that time was there were no scandals. It was a scandal. Felda was scandal-free because first you had Taib Andak, who was the chairman of Felda from 1958 to almost 1970, I think. And then, of course, for a while there was Musa Hitam. And then later we had this very illustrious gentleman, Raja Tun Muhammad Alias. So these were people of very high integrity who ran these organizations. And in 1974, when we set up Petronas, again, we had a first-class team. People like Rastam Hadi, Abdullah Saleh, and then we had Tun Ismail running Bank Negara. So it was also an era where we saw a lot of people of very high integrity running the show. Now today, we have had all these elections, all these elections from 2008. I think 2008 was a big surprise. There was a huge change in the configuration of power. The government lost its two-thirds majority. And we had what I would say was a situation where UMNO, which had been in power all along, could not cope with the reality of a changed system. This new configuration of power was something that was completely unacceptable to them. And they, I think, went beyond the normal, beyond the set norms to try to destabilize the country. It didn't happen, but they had both in Abdullah Badawi and Najib, I would say relatively weak prime ministers. These two fellows were, Abdullah Badawi he was not prime ministerial material, not at all. And he was made prime minister because he was the last yes man left in Mahathir's cabinet. Okay, so he was made prime minister, and it was sickening. He was a good man, but he could not manage the prime minister's job.
He was an administrator,
huh?
More an administrator than a...
No, I think he's not even a high-class administrator. No, he was not. He can't cope with many things. And so, you had this situation where he became prime minister. And, I would liken the situation to what happened when Suharto fell in Indonesia. You had this very strong man in power on top, this Mahathir in power. Then you had this guy who wants to befriend the driver of the deputy prime minister's car, that kind of thing. He wants to go and shake hands with him. In fact, one cabinet minister related to me that when Badawi became the prime minister, he had that elections and he did very well in the election. It was more a reaction against Mahathir rather than support for him. And at the first cabinet meeting, he came in and then he went around and shook hands with all the 32 other ministers. You see. So one minister said, this is taking a lot of time, which is true. But you see, he was bent on this kind of populism. And of course, he had appointed Najib Tun Razak as his deputy prime minister. And well, I thought it was not a bad government because Najib is quite a capable fellow relative to Badawi. But Najib somehow got embroiled in a lot of other things. And one of the setbacks for Malaysia, I believe, was the murder of Altantuya Sharibu on October the 19th, 2006. This was, Badawi had been in power just for 3 years. And then you had this murder involving a foreign national who had actually a Muslim name. She was known as Aminah binti Abdullah. And she was murdered. And then, there was, people were asking what had happened to Malaysia. What if something is wrong? And I think because we didn't handle it well, we didn't handle that issue in a very, I would say, in a sort of standoffish, very sober and sustained manner, the authority of the government came to be questioned. What was the authority of the prime minister? The prime minister didn't defend him, but the government was tainted by this murder. That two members of the country's elite, elite security force, the unit Tindakan Khas, which looks after prime ministers, were involved in the murder of this lady. And the way it was murdered was horrendous. But even more significantly, it took place just 3 days before Hari Raya. October the 19th was 3 days before Hari Raya. And it was fasting month that these chaps were involved in killing her. And she, to me, it would seem she was a Muslim. So it was horrendous, it was bad. At that point, I have a particular involvement in this matter because I was ambassador in Korea at that time. And I had responsibility for Mongolia at that time. So I got like the first kind of representations on what happened were made to me as the ambassador to Mongolia by the Mongolian ambassador in Korea. So, and then we could not give them any straight answers, and it tainted us. And we fast forward, of course, Badawi then had another set of elections where he didn't do that well. And that is the 2008 elections, and Najib took over as the prime minister. Now, I think Najib's, it's too soon to say what Najib did. I don't think we will know what he did. Because I think he has only been, he has been tried and he has been convicted. He's now in prison. But for him to indulge in something like this kind of outrageous grand larceny, surely this fellow must have done other things also. And recently his wife was asked, his wife has been depositing huge sums of money into her account. Yeah. So the DPP said, she didn't have any means, she was only a spouse of the prime minister. Where did she get this money from? Where did this money come from? So these people, their lives must be full of miracles. That they have money dropping into the lap, which they have to carry to the bank. So this was some of the issues that sort of damaged the credibility, and it was a well-known fact. In fact, one of the good things about the present situation is when there's a rumor about something, everybody talks quite openly about it. It was not in hushed tones, but under Najib, it was under hushed tones. Yeah. But people said no, that the prime minister's wife is spending a lot of money. It was quite obvious she was spending a lot of money. Now, when you do this, then there will bound to be allegations of corruption, allegations of abuse of power, and all that. And well, today she's being tried for one of these things. So we have this situation where the government's respectability was lost under Najib. And we fast forward to May 2018, and we have the great folk hero, Dr. Mahathir, taking over as the prime minister for the second time. He was well into his 90s when he became the prime minister. There was no, people didn't sort of express any kind of misgivings about him becoming the prime minister, because they thought that maybe he was a reformed man and he will do something which is different from the way he was earlier. I think Mahathir was very consistent in disappointing all of us. No, other than appointing the Attorney General who was quite sure of what he had to do, and then attending to the corruption cases involving Najib Razak. I believe that Dr. Mahathir, I don't know, I do not know why and how it happened that he lost power, that he created a situation where he was pitted against, he himself is a representative of the Malay mainstream group, and yet you had people who were saying that he was not protecting them. So you had the Sheraton move with Azmin Ali and Mahyuddin and all that coming to power. And they obviously had no legitimacy to assume power, because soon after becoming prime minister, he was rescued by the COVID situation. He declared a state of emergency, and he he lived through that. He was trying to get an emergency first. The Agong declined it. And then he insisted and he got the thing and it failed. Now, then you had the illustrious Ismail Sabri as Prime Minister for a short time. And they were not, I think UMNO was unhappy with him, and UMNO forced this election, which took place in November last year. Now, this election is it's a very important election, I think. It has brought a long-time aspirant for Prime Ministership, Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim, to the high office of Prime Minister. Now, but because of the situation of some states not having dissolved their state assemblies, this election was prolonged, as I said earlier, and could only be completed on August the 12th. Now that he has become he's now fully established as the Prime Minister, I think we should expect him to focus on issues of national interest, of grave national concern. And these are the issues that I defined earlier, which is the decline in the country, general decline in education, and devaluation of our currency, very huge debt problem, humongous civil service size. Now, these are all issues that we are expecting Dato Sri Anwar to sort of attend to. Now, I find that it's only it's only 2 weeks since the elections. Only in the 2 weeks, I think Anwar has not provided clear indications of the direction he's taking. And I think this is a matter of concern to all of us. On the other hand, many of us may think that he has to attend to all these issues. But I think in his mind, and probably in his situation, he also finds that power in Malaysia has always been vested with the Peninsular Malay community, Peninsular Malay political community. And he sees himself as not being fully endorsed by this community, which is a difficulty, it's a legitimate problem that he faces. And for that reason, he finds that he needs to identify somewhat, not fully, but somewhat, with the very group, Perikatan Nasional, which opposed him in the election. For that reason, you'll find that in the last 2 weeks, he has made a lot of statements which show him more as an appendage of Perikatan Nasional than as the leader, as a full-fledged leader of Pakatan Harapan. Our expectation is that he will be the full-fledged, clear leader of Pakatan Harapan. But now he is also identifying himself with causes that have been espoused by Perikatan Nasional. I think the latest is today, he came out with a statement, it published, carried by the Wives today, where he said that these 40 hadiths compiled by Imam Nawawi should be part of the curriculum for students in schools. Now, this may probably be a very good thing for the student. I think he's concerned that he wants a kind of a holistic Islam here, where they can accept different communities living in a plural, peaceful, multiracial society. And maybe he sees there is a lack of this in the community. And maybe these hadiths contain those the essences which could contribute to imbibing the spirit of accepting the others. Even if that is the case, does the Prime Minister concern himself with something like this? Should he concern himself with this? This is an issue that I think we should address. And Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim must be fully conscious that as a country, even the Prime Minister Mahathir himself, former Prime Minister himself, has expressed the view that as a country, as an education system, we are giving too much emphasis to religious studies. And at a time when we should be focusing on science, technology, and this kind of areas, AI, he only has the initials AI, but he's not looking at AI. Oh, Anwar Ibrahim. So this is a time when we would expect him. My own observation of him, this is very personal. My own observation of him is that he is speaking on too many different issues. One of the issues that troubled me was he said that he would link up with the president of Turkey, Erdogan, to fight Islamophobia. Now, as Prime Minister, taking over as Prime Minister of this country at this juncture in this country, when we are suffering from the 5 Ds that we have, the division, devaluation, decline, all this, I would expect the Prime Minister to focus on domestic issues, not on any international issue, because it is our bread and butter. Malaysia needs to get back on its feet. And the way it can get back on its feet is to do a due diligence of the issues that trouble us, to get a panel of experts to advise him on what course of action we can do to achieve some course correction. Obviously, one of the things that he has to do is look at tackling corruption. Yeah. He has been saying a lot about fighting corruption. But more than that, I think he has to look at how the problem of corruption can be seriously overcome. Because I think what we have is, you see, other countries in our region also have corruption. Thailand, there is corruption. Indonesia, there is corruption. The Philippines has had corruption. But I think in our case, we have immigration officers who allegedly own a Rolls-Royce car. I mean, that means the capacity to make money from your low government position is so high. There's something that means that the guy, you have to put the fear of God in these people. And the Prime Minister has to appoint a person of high caliber, great integrity, and some legal background to head the MACC. It can be anyone, can be a member of the public, and the chap should be charged with the responsibility of addressing this issue. Maybe you can't eradicate it, but you can reduce corruption. So to me, this is a very, very big issue. The other issue that the Prime Minister has to handle is this debt issue. We have to look at how can we generate greater income for the state, because obviously the need to sort of do away with the GST in 2018 was something that Dr. Mahathir's team had to sort of concede in order to win the election. But today, if government revenue doesn't fall short of what is expected, it is not possible to sort of sustain the present lifestyle. So we have a huge civil service here, which is nearly 1.6 million. We have 800,000 pensioners in Malaysia. And what does the Prime Minister do? Just before the election, he announces he's going to increase the salaries. So, sometimes, I don't know, you need to be populist, yeah, but you can't be so, you cannot be so indifferent to the fact that the government cannot sustain this kind of generosity. And we have a situation where actually the rate of people being turned away at government hospitals and all that is getting increasingly high, because they just can't cope with because we had in place a system, and now because of rapid urbanization, people who have led quite healthy lives in rural areas are living in urban areas. They don't have the kind of activity and the kind of industry that is associated with active life. So today you really need to look at how you can improve the general well-being of the population of the country. And Anwar finds that, and I'm surprised Anwar is talking about fighting Islamophobia. Yeah. Actually, in Malaysia, we don't have Islamophobia. We are all Muslims living with Muslims. We live very harmoniously. This is an international problem. And for a Prime Minister who has just come into the office, There is no need to concentrate on issues like this. Now, this is precisely the kind of subject that Dr. Mahathir went into. And we got nothing from all these things that we did. I'll give you the example of Bosnia. I don't know how much money was spent there. It is a huge amount of money that was expended in Bosnia. But what did we get from it? You know, we got nothing from it. And then there is the, I was saying earlier that Anwar has been trying to identify himself so much with what PN stands for. So you have these 4 states, you know, which are now under pass, principally under pass actually, police, KKT, these 3 states, PKKT, you know, these 4 states. Now these 4 states, I think that the Prime Minister cannot do anything. This is the electorate. They are entitled to certain kind of protection. Being members of Malaysia, they get whatever every other Malaysian gets. But for him to try to go and spend money and then try to convert them, no, I think there is no time, there's no scope for that. We don't have the resources for that. That time is past. You know? And there is also no money now at the moment. So to conclude, I've been speaking now for how long? How much time do I have?
You still have that, don't worry.
So half an hour. I think that at this stage, what Anwar has to do is that he has to shed something in him. Anwar is a chap who has had a very humiliating personal experience in his life. Imagine he was Deputy Prime Minister one day, and he was sacked, and 18 days later, when we had a very grand event in KL, the Queen had arrived September the 20th, 1998. And 6 hours after the Queen arrived, she arrived at 1 something, at 7 something, Anwar was arrested. And he was given a black eye by the Inspector General of Police. You know, it's a very serious, he has suffered a lot of humiliation. And for him to come from there to where he is now has been a very, very torturous, tortured kind of way. So I think I have a lot of sympathy for what this man has suffered. But now, as the Prime Minister, what I feel is that he can no longer act as the underdog. He is no longer the underdog. Whatever you say, he's the top dog in the country. He should be calling the shots. And he can call the shots effectively if he speaks less. He picks issues on which he's going to succeed. If he goes on issues that are tendential and of no relevance to most of the population, then you know he's indulging in mudslinging. He's not indulging in management. You know. So he has to shed this underdog image and come out of it. And whatever we say, the last elections have actually entrenched him in his position. He's stronger now than he was before August the 12th. So there should be no talk about any kind of defection, any kind of decline. And he should address these issues I mentioned, debt, decline, devaluation, discrimination, and the divisions that have plagued Malaysia. This election took a form of a contest between the purveyors of, essentially it was this, you know, there were guys who were promising you heaven. They said, you vote for us, you go to heaven. You don't vote for us, you'll be in hell. I mean, that's what, we didn't say that, but that's what they meant. Yeah, so Anwar should now say, look, I'm neither with the hell or with the heavenly group, you know. I'm in the middle and I want my country to succeed. I think this is what Anwar has to do. And he has to strengthen his ties with a very important component of his party, which is Amanah. You know? Because Amanah is actually the more moderate and reasonable wing that broke away from PAS. And he has 2 or 3 Amanah MPs whom we all love, including Muhammad Sabu and also Zulkifli Ahmad, you know, the former health minister. We love them. And I think that Anwar must identify himself with them and give them some leeway to also speak on his behalf. Then he has got people like Fahmi Fadzil from his own party, you know, who should be given additional responsibility. And I think all of us, I think all Malaysians trust fully Rafizi Ramli. So Rafizi Ramli is another person that Anwar should identify himself with and tell the people, look, I'm not going to be here forever. These are the people that you should look at for future leadership, because that will also give us some comfort that Anwar has thought about the future. So now, as I see it, what Anwar would seek to achieve with this group of people that I mentioned, particularly this group of Peninsular Malays whom I've mentioned, is that he will try to achieve some multicultural, multi-ethnic balance, which would be against the kind of monopoly of power that Perikatan Nasional is seeking for Peninsular Malays to control Malaysia. Another group of allies that Anwar can rely on, apart from these Peninsular Malays, is the leaders of Sabah and Sarawak, because they are very important. Sabah and Sarawak are important components of Malaysia. It is about time that the Prime Minister or any Prime Minister gives this region the recognition that is due to it. So I would expect that Anwar should go along these lines in order to achieve some kind of a control of the extremism that has set into the country. There is extremism in Malaysia. He can't go and confront it, but he can get his allies to do it for him. And so before I conclude, I just think that this election that took place is actually a continuation of a long process. It actually started in 1951. In 1951, Dato M Santhananaban wanted to bring non-Malays into UMNO, and a number of Malay leaders objected to it. He resigned and Tunku took over. As it was, surprisingly, it was on this date, August 24th, 1951, that the UMNO election took place and Tunku Abdul Rahman became the president of UMNO. And then we had, after 1951, I've gone through the earlier period of formation of Malaysia and May 13th. We had 1971 when Tun Razak introduced the NEP and had this new set of, again there, as far as the non-Malays are concerned, we should pay tribute to Tun Dr. Ismail, because Tun Dr. Ismail was the man who inspired the trust in that this NEP will not be forever, that this was a temporary handicap, and that eventually this will be overcome. Unfortunately, Tun Dr. Ismail died, and we have a situation where they are trying to perpetuate this system. And then we had, I think, the best years were, I think, Tun Hussein On, who was a very decent, down-to-earth human being, who had a very high sense of integrity. And we will all recall that it was during his time that Dato Harun Idris was convicted, and Hussein, there were many appeals to him to sort of try to change it, but he didn't. He stuck to his guns and he did it. Then we have, of course, the disastrous decades under Dr. Mahathir. I think Mahathir was the worst prime minister in the history of this country. He not only lied and cheated, but he also misled us. All his Vision 2020 was nonsense. And I can tell you this because he had not studied the history of Japan or Korea. This is a very general statement, but let me say that in 1872, the Japanese had what was called the Iwakura mission. What they did was they sent their top scholars, including their soldiers, to North America and to Europe. And it was for a period of 6 months. They went to study the success of these Western countries. On the basis of the reporting done by the Iwakura mission, Japan adopted policies that were part of the science and technology culture of the United States, Germany, and the UK, which were the principal industrializing countries then, and France. So when we looked east, Dr. Mahathir had not seen beyond the bushes, into what is behind. So I think it was a disaster. As for Korea, the most illustrious president of Korea was Park Chung-hee. He was president of Korea from 1961 till the day he was assassinated, October
He was an army
26th.
general.
Yeah, he was an army general, but he started his career in the Japanese army. So he had a sense of the Japanese discipline. And when he became president of Korea in 1961, he was as a result of a coup that he launched against the Korean president. After he became president, they didn't have relations with Japan at that time. They only established relations 4 years later. And when he sought compensation for what the Japanese had done to Korea, he only asked for one thing. He said, help us to build the world's best steel mill. That's how Pohang Steel was, POSCO was created. And he appointed one of his colleagues as to manage the plant. And today, almost 40% of the sheeting for all the motor vehicles are produced in Korea for the whole world. Yeah. So you know, when Dr. Mahathir adopted these policies, he didn't understand the history of these countries. You know. I think I might. All the stuff. So on the basis of that, he thought Korea was a country which produces good steel. No longer. Korea is I lived in Korea for almost 5 years. It's one of the most expensive countries in the world. And today they face very serious problems. Both Korea and Japan face very serious problems. Both of them have declining populations because people are not getting marrying very late, or they're not having families. Now, the way of the future for the Prime Minister is, let's not talk about the Look East policy. I think we should not. The future lies in two countries in this region today. One is China, the other is India. These are the countries that are on the move. And if we want to have a realistic appreciation of how we can improve, we ought to look at these two countries. Another country that we should not disregard, and this is our most important neighbor, Indonesia. Because as I see it, Indonesia is the country that has gone through serious difficulties since the Second World War. And even before, the Dutch treated the Indonesians very badly. But today, Indonesia has established itself as an orderly democracy. And the quality of their education is very good. The quality of the religion they practice is something to be emulated by people. It's a Muslim nation. Yeah. We have to respect what Indonesia is. And finally, I would say that I talked about China and India. We have foreign workers in our midst. Some of them are from these countries. But we have to give dignity to every worker in this country. We have to really look at how we can improve a lot of workers, especially in the lower rungs of the economic ladder, so that they get to have a decent life. And we cannot treat Indonesian workers any less than anyone else. We should treat them as human beings. And whatever we say, we have to admit that these foreign workers have contributed a great deal to our country's development. And we have to devise now a system, a model of development where the reliance on foreign workers is reduced. Because to have 7 million, almost 7 million foreign workers in a population of 32 million is very high. There's something structurally wrong with our country. So these are the issues that I would think that the Prime Minister should address to assure ourselves of a better future. And I think that with proper advice, he can build our country a better future for Malaysia. And the prospects of, I think, religious, ethnic harmony in Malaysia are very good. People in Malaysia are generally very peaceful. The Malays are not known to have warlike qualities threatening us. Whatever divisions we have to concede, have been created by the politicians. And that lot of politicians must be got rid of at all costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.